Order. We come now to the adjournment. The whip to move.
Beg to move this House to now adjourn.
The question is that this House do now adjourn. Mrs. Cheryl Gillan.
Yeah, here.
Mr. Speaker, I'm absolutely delighted to have been able to secure this adjournment debate entitled Alternative Transport Fuels. I hope I've not misled the House because today I want to ask about a specific fuel, and I want to ask the Department of Transport about its position on the new diesel substitute fuel called aqua methanol and its potentially vital role in reducing diesel exhaust pollution. The last Labour government's diesel-friendly policies have led to a very serious diesel particulate and nitrogen oxides pollution problem, and there are dreadful health consequences. And ministers will be aware of the recent Supreme Court judgment indicating the urgency for government to act to alleviate this health problem, which will also mean that the UK could avoid incurring extremely large fines for failing to meet EU air quality standards. So today, on a day when we've had a very large environmental lobby here at the House of Commons, I want to ask the Minister, who I welcome to his role and to the front bench, what he is going to do to support a fuel which will contribute to reducing emissions and improve our air quality. In 2001, my constituent Peter Dodd and his company 0M drove a senior official from the Department of Transport along Oxford Street in a very special London black cab. That cab was unique because it was running on aqua methanol and emitted virtually no poisonous particulates or nitrogen oxides. In the following 6 years or so, 0M, sponsored by the Department of Transport and the Treasury, converted vans and heavy goods vehicles to run on aqua methanol so that these other major sources of diesel pollution could be cleaned up. The report delivered in 2009 confirmed without doubt that aqua methanol could make a major impact on diesel pollution, could reduce CO2, could reduce UK exposure to oil prices, and, most importantly, in these continuing times of austerity and unlike nearly all other alternative fuels, would only require modest government financial support during its introductory phase, even if oil prices stay low. I give way to my honourable colleague.
And as the Speaker said, the adjournment debates are very important debates, and this is very important as well. Would the honourable lady agree that there are other alternatives apart from what the honourable lady has outlined, and that is the electric cars? That's a new motive and a way of reducing the pollution that we have across the whole of the community. Does she feel that maybe government should put an emphasis upon that as well?
The honourable gentleman has pursued this, and I think it is important. I hope the Minister will have taken note, but I think it is important that the government does look at these alternative fuels, particularly in the light of the detrimental effect on our environment of the current fuels that are in use. The report that I mentioned concluded aqua methanol should be introduced as soon as possible. So I think the question is, Mr. Speaker, is why is there no clean aqua methanol vehicles on our city streets yet? Simply because the present Europe-wide fuel tax rules are blocking its introduction. The existing rules mean that aqua methanol would cost something like £1.90 a litre at the pump, and obviously that's a commercially impossible price. Fortunately, after thorough government investigation and confirmation of the report's findings during the coalition government, the Treasury have now agreed to make the tax changes necessary to enable this new fuel to be competitively priced versus diesel in the UK by putting it on a level playing field with other gas-based fuels. They announced their intention to do so in the two most recent budget and autumn statements, and finally included the necessary legislation in the last budgetary finance bill just before the recent election. However, the change has still not been enacted, because in the wash-up session, the opposition in fact objected to it, despite the fact that the entire Green Fuel Challenge project to demonstrate the need for aqua methanol and prove its worth in exchange for the tax change was initiated and completed during their time in government. I'm now hopeful that the Chancellor will take this through on July the 8th, so this adjournment debate is to emphasise the importance to health of enacting this new fuel tax measure immediately, but equally as important, and where we have yet to have an undertaking from government, of integrating the fuel into DFT's fuel strategies and funding programmes to accelerate its introduction. The importance of doing this as soon as possible can hardly be overstated. It's actually unlikely that many people have heard of aquamethanol until now. For those that have long memories, they will remember the Green Fuel Challenge. And it was to foster the development of greener transport fuels. Of the 3 groups selected for support, the one given the highest award was Zero M Limited, a company in my constituency. Their proposition was that converting commercial diesel vehicles to aquamethanol offered many advantages, reducing particulate emissions from diesel engines and lower NOx, which is the diesel exhaust gas responsible for forming smog and acid rain, as well as being central to the formation of tropospheric ozone. Further, they had also discovered that renewable aquamethanol could be made more easily and cost-effectively than most, if not all, other proposed green transport fuels. In addition, as if this was not enough, substituting aquamethanol for diesel would improve UK fuel security and reduce our exposure to politically volatile crude oil prices. This is because aquamethanol is derived not from crude oil, but from the huge and growing global resource of natural gas. Importantly, from the climate change point of view, it can also be made from a wide range of renewable sources, including, rather amazingly, ultimately from renewable electricity and the carbon dioxide in the air, turning that controversial little climate change bugbear into a jolly good friend. Now, this means that by introducing methanol made from plentiful natural gas in the short term, so-called brown aquamethanol, we can immediately strengthen the fight against diesel pollution and at the same time, relatively quickly, win CO2, fuel security, exports and job benefits. Once brown aquamethanol is established, it can be replaced by chemically identical green renewable methanol down the track once the chemically identical green form becomes economically viable versus diesel. In this way, brown natural gas-based methanol paves the way, enables and acts as that solid bridge to near-zero CO2 green methanol without requiring the massive government subsidies that would be incurred trying to go directly to the green form without using the brown bridge. The members of the Zero M team, between them, have the most amazing experience. They have over a century of expertise in alternative fuels. So these constituents of mine really do know what they're talking about. And they particularly understand how oil markets work and the critical importance of minimising the need for government subsidies. Because oil prices, Mr. Speaker, can actually go down as well as up. And when they go down, and history shows they can stay low for a long time, subsidies that looked fairly short-term and affordable can suddenly look very high and indefinite. In fact, they can become, and often have in the past, completely unsustainable economically. Having had the long experience of seeing high-cost alternative fuel projects fail from time to time, and because governments eventually cancelled the subsidies when oil prices fell, Zero M's approach throughout has been to find a way to introduce a fuel that will be commercially viable when oil prices are low. And it's interesting to note that before the Second World War, anecdotally, it was believed that there was only 12 years of oil left at the then current consumption rate of about 8 to 10 million barrels a day. And today, the numbers in BP's June 2015 statistical review show that apparently we have 52 more years of reserves at 2014's global consumption rate of 92 million barrels a day. So we're using about 10 times more oil today, and it's going to last 4 times longer from today than they thought it would last in 1935. So while it's probably true that oil could run out at some distant point in the future, the oil industry has a habit of finding new deposits and even cheaper means of extracting ever more from them, extending the problem we see from pollution today into the future. Now, Zero M believe that aquamethanol could be the earliest commercially viable alternative because it only needs launch support to begin replacing diesel made from oil. Of course, it has to be remembered, but rarely is, that the more that subsidised alternative fuels displace oil, the greater the oversupply of oil will become and the lower the oil price is likely to go. And that's the catch-22 of developing alternative fuels. They look good when the oil prices are high, but if they succeed, they will almost inevitably cause oil prices to fall. And when we look at biofuels, one of the key planks of a EU strategy to reduce emissions, there was a March 2015 report for the department, Options for Energy Transport Policy to 2030, and it showed that crude oil prices in excess of $250 a barrel are needed before most anticipated renewable biofuels can become commercially viable on a standalone basis. So even the government is expecting bioethanol and biodiesel to need heavy taxpayer subsidy through the Renewable Transport Fuels obligation far, far into the future. It's surely very worrying that even this government report accepts that biofuels are not expected to be commercially viable even by 2030 and possibly far beyond. Add to this the fact that including biodiesel in diesel fuel does virtually nothing to reduce particulates and NOx, the key city street level pollution issue, and even worse, including biodiesel in the normal fossil diesel, actually reduces miles per gallon. It seems to me, therefore, that aquamethanol is one initiative that can definitely be foreseen to be commercially viable at today's low oil prices of around $65 a barrel, massively below the over $250 per barrel the government is expecting biodiesel to cost in 2030 in the TEFT report I referred to earlier. Zero M have calculated that in terms of particulates and NOx reduction, converting one diesel van to aquamethanol at an estimated £5,000 is equivalent to converting 5 cars to electricity, which cost the government at least £25,000 in subsidies. And converting one HGV at an estimated cost of £15,000 would deliver the same diesel fumes reductions as converting 30 cars to electricity at a cost of more than £150,000. So if government funded, say, £5,000 for each van and £15,000 for each HGV converted to aquamethanol, that investment could save the government at 20 grand and 135 grand respectively, versus what it would cost via the electric car route, and still achieve the same result. So aquamethanol has the ability to give a significantly bigger bang for our tax pound in terms of cutting street-level diesel pollution than relying mainly on the introduction of electric vehicles or indeed on the introduction of hydrogen vehicles, which are likely to be even more expensive with commercial viability even further into the future. And yet at present, even with all this promise, aquamethanol is still not an integral part of the Department of Transport's published alternatives fuel strategy and funding plans, when all common sense suggests it should be strongly backed to accelerate and bolster current efforts to tackle this awful diesel pollution problem. Waiting for electric cars or hydrogen buses to fix this problem is being tried and has been tried for some time, but still the diesel pollution worsens with the consequential health issues compounding the cost to government. So tonight, I'm asking the Minister to add this potentially powerful new string to the government's bow in the urgent battle to improve air quality. The proposed tax change is the culmination of over 14 years of government-initiated and sponsored work to investigate this exciting new fuel and then enable it to be introduced. The new tax measure has been approved by all relevant government departments, including the Treasury. The relevant legislation has been drafted and all the necessary consultations have been completed successfully. There is nothing further that the Treasury need do now beyond including the measure in the Finance Bill on July the 8th and with an early implementation date. And can I say I have worked alongside my constituents through this journey, and it has been a long and painful journey, and we are very grateful that the Treasury has now heard the message. Because aquamethanol can and should be a major and effective part of the solution to this problem, and requires no financial support from the government after the introductory phase. I'm sure the government will enact the promised deferred tax change. I'm asking the DFT tonight to complete the picture and integrate aquamethanol fully into those published strategies and funding policies. Without the tax change, launch of the aquamethanol is economically prohibitive and will not occur, and all these fine opportunities and valuable benefits will be foregone. But without the other half of the equation, the DFT supporting aquamethanol, both financially and with publicity, our city air will continue to be full of dirty diesel particulates and NOx for much longer than it need be. With both those steps in place, I think that Ford and Mercedes and Iveco and Scania and DAF, to name just a few of the van and HGV manufacturers most popular in the UK, could start making and importing clean aquamethanol-capable vehicles into the UK. I would like to applaud the Minister of Transport and the Chancellor of the Exchequer for having the foresight to see that aquamethanol deserves to be put on the same taxation footing as other natural gas-based transport fuels. Now, I also urge him to redirect some funds from some longer-term, higher-cost initiatives, such as hydrogen, along the lines the Department is already doing for compressed and liquid natural gas. Given the severity of the current pollution problem, continuing with the status quo really cannot be an acceptable or justifiable option. I believe, by being an early adopter of this now, we can actually improve our environmental credentials. So I'm hoping the Minister will give me some response that will encourage my constituents and enable us to kickstart aquamethanol and introduce it so that we can clean up our air as quickly as possible.
Call the Parliamentary Under-Secretary of State for Transport, Mr Andrew Jones, to reply.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. And may I start by congratulating my right honourable friend for securing this debate about alternative transport fuels this evening, specifically about aquamethanol. It is indeed very topical because governments across the world are looking to reduce their reliance upon foreign energy imports, to clean the air in our towns and cities and, of course, reduce carbon emissions. We're seeing increasing global urbanisation and a recognition that not only is fossil fuel finite, but also becoming increasingly carbon intensive. And my right honourable friend is correct in that in the UK we face some very significant environmental challenges. In 2013, our domestic transport greenhouse gas emissions accounted for 21% of the overall domestic total greenhouse gas emissions. Road vehicles are responsible for 92% of UK CO2 emissions and 80% of roadside nitrogen dioxide. And every year we have around 29,000 early deaths attributable to poor air quality. Now, there's also an EU legislative context. The UK has a legal requirement to meet EU limits for exposure to air pollutants. As an EU member state, we are also committed to reducing greenhouse gas emissions in road transport by 20% by 2020 and by 40% by 2030. Indeed, my right honourable friend and I stood on a manifesto in the recent general election that reaffirmed our commitment to the Climate Change Act, and road transport has to play its part if we're to reduce emissions by 80% by 2050, to continue to do even more to tackle air pollution, to back green energy, which is value for money, and to continue to foster an economy which supports high knowledge job creation. We did so because in this government we continue to see the environmental challenges for transport as an opportunity. Alternative transport fuels will have a role to play in helping us deliver these commitments. Now, we have already made much progress towards meeting some of these challenges. Air quality has improved significantly in recent decades. Harmful particulate matter emissions from road transport have fallen by 31% since 1990, and between 1992 and 2012, total nitrogen dioxide emissions and background concentrations have more than halved. Through the supply of sustainable biofuels under the Renewable Transport Fuel Obligation, we are making significant carbon savings. In 2013-14, the use of biofuels was the equivalent of taking 1.35 million cars off the road. But this is just part of a wider strategy in which we're working with other government departments, with industry and with local authorities to reduce harmful emissions across transport modes. £2 billion has been committed since 2011 to increase the uptake of ultra-low emission vehicles, greener transport initiatives and support local authorities to take action. This goes much wider than grants supporting the uptake of electric vehicles, though I have to say I am making my debut behind the wheel of an electric vehicle tomorrow morning, as Nissan are lending a Nissan Leaf to the department, and I'm looking forward to driving that. But this much wider support has included £30 million for bus operators and local authorities across England and Wales to bid for low-emission buses and supporting infrastructure. £8 million of funding awarded to 23 local authorities for cutting-edge pollution-reducing technologies, which will be fitted to over 1,200 vehicles. This included £500,000 funding to Birmingham City Council to convert 80 taxis from diesel to LPG. And as announced on the 26th of March, £6.6 million of funding to support the establishment of an initial network of 12 hydrogen refuelling stations, heralding the imminent arrival of hydrogen fuel cell vehicles onto UK roads. The Government is working to address the environmental impact associated with road freight through the Low Carbon Truck Trial, which is providing over £11 million to part fund around 350 low-carbon commercial vehicles. But sustainable biofuels are also likely to have an important role to play in reducing carbon emissions in other sectors, such as freight and aviation, where there are limited alternatives at decarbonisation, and we're considering options to support this. In aviation, the UK is working through the International Civil Aviation Organisation to try to secure agreement on a global market-based measure to reduce international aviation emissions. In the meantime, the UK continues to support the use of regional measures, in particular the Aviation EU Emissions Trading System. In rail, we're tackling greenhouse gas emissions through a major electrification programme, along with the procurement of new electric and low-emission trains to replace the older diesels. In shipping, we're also pleased that a number of major ports in Europe have now declared the intention of establishing liquefied natural gas, or LNG, bunkering infrastructure in the next couple of years, given that LNG emits fewer harmful emissions than marine diesel fuel. This is essential because ship owners simply are unlikely to invest in LNG-powered ships unless there are adequate refuelling facilities. But returning to road transport, we expect to announce this summer the winners of an advanced biofuel demonstration plant competition. This will award up to £25 million of capital funding over 3 years to support the construction of plants in the UK. Now, I mention these initiatives to show the range of government actions, and they are across different fuels and across different modes of transport. It's clear that really our approach is about providing support in a technologically neutral way. Technologically neutral, but will focus upon the range of evidence available. This has, I think, been successful in encouraging the most sustainable fuels and low-emission vehicles. I'm also confident that, given the UK's strengths in innovation and research, we are well placed to succeed in the global marketplace in rising to the environmental challenges we face. Further to the lower duty rate for methanol announced in last year's budget, and as mentioned by my right honourable friend, she has also suggested that we should look to support innovation by further integrating aquamethanol into the Department's funding policies and published strategies. We of course recognise that whilst overall air quality has improved over the last 20 years, much more needs to be done, in particular to reduce roadside concentrations of nitrogen dioxide. The fuel industry is complex, diverse and rapidly developing. Fuel production and supporting infrastructure are also at different levels of maturity. So as policymakers, we must give careful consideration to a range of possible solutions for tackling air quality, such as potential improvements in vehicle technology and fuels and other sustainable transport policies and options. I understand that the actual air quality benefits of aquamethanol are dependent upon vehicle technology, for example, particulate traps, in which it is used. The vehicle technology will determine the extent to which methanol replaces diesel and any potential reduction in air quality pollutants. I'd like to reassure my right honourable friend that as we move forward with our policy development, aquamethanol will most certainly continue to be considered amongst all the other options, considered on its merits, as is the case with all our funding programmes. I agree that aquamethanol is potentially a stepping stone to securing greenhouse gas emission savings. However, if aquamethanol is to deliver greenhouse gas emission savings, it's important that the right feedstock is used to make it. These need to be renewable and sustainable to deliver the significant greenhouse gas emission savings we are seeking. And as my right honourable friend mentioned, she mentioned the opportunity to produce sustainable methanol from carbon dioxide and renewable energy, which is, I have to say, a very attractive policy option. Further to a call for evidence on advanced fuels at the end of 2013, the Department has considered the potential role for such non-biological renewable fuels and possible support mechanisms for advanced fuels, as these may deliver the significant greenhouse gas reductions we're seeking. Our examination of advanced and alternative transport fuels has continued to the report produced in March by the Transport Energy Task Force, titled Options for Energy Transport Policy to 2030. That task force was set up by the Department and the Low Carbon Vehicle Partnership in October last year. It's made up of experts from industry and non-governmental organisations, and primarily it considered a range of scenarios to meet our 2020 greenhouse gas emission reductions and renewable transport fuel targets, as well as considering how low carbon fuels could help reduce greenhouse gas emissions from UK transport in the period to 2030 and beyond. We're considering that report carefully as part of work to transpose amendments to the Fuel Quality Directive, which have recently been agreed, and the Renewable Energy Directive, which we hope will be finalised very shortly. As evidenced by the Transport Energy Task Force report, we will clearly need sustainable biofuels to meet our renewable energy and greenhouse gas reduction targets. So I therefore welcome the investments made by UK biofuel suppliers to date in what has been a very difficult investment environment. And I will shortly be meeting with a number of them. The delay in agreeing measures to address indirect land use change at EU level over the past several years has caused uncertainty for biofuel suppliers, and I recognise from my own business career that nothing deters investment more than uncertainty. So I'm keen that we now get on with the business of implementing these measures as soon as possible. This debate is very timely. The issue of air quality is rising up the agenda and is certainly a priority for me. I have already met with colleagues from DEFRA and expect to be having further such meetings as we take our plan forward. And I recognise that aquamethanol can play a role in tackling that problem. It's also... Of course.
I'm grateful to the Minister to give way. I thank him for taking a positive approach to what I think could play a fuel could play a very important part in his strategy. Would he do me the honour of meeting with my constituents and the directors of Zero M to look at this in much greater detail? I appreciate the Minister is new to his post, and it would give me great pleasure to bring them into the department to talk to the Minister about the benefits of aquamethanol.
Well, I will very happily make that commitment. I'll be delighted to meet with my right honourable friend and her constituents. My approach to this, and indeed to all of the issues within my area, will be to have a very open-door policy and to work with the industry. So I'll be delighted for such a meeting, and my officials will contact her to set that meeting up. It's also true to say that the progress that we can see ahead with the take-up of electric and ultra-low emission vehicles are more in the areas of car and light vans. HGVs are harder to crack, and it is certainly very interesting to see how aquamethanol could again play a role. My right honourable friend asks that we have taken the initiative in the DFT. Well, I will be doing just that. Aquamethanol will be included in all of our considerations. So once again, I'd just like to thank my right honourable friend really for securing this debate this evening. The government recognises that vehicles are likely to require liquid and gaseous fuels for decades to come, and that not all modes of transport are viable for electrification in the near future. It's therefore crucial that the UK develops a range of technologies to produce alternative low-carbon fuels, reduce air pollutants from road transport, and grow the UK's green economy. We will continue to work closely with experts from the industry and environmental, non-governmental organisations on future support mechanisms, and will continue also to review the support provided with a view to securing the best environmental outcomes, supporting a competitive market, minimising the cost of industry, the taxpayer and the motorist, and making our environment a priority, particularly the cleaner air that my right honourable friend mentioned. Aquamethanol will be a part of that review, and I again thank her for highlighting its importance in tackling the issues we face.
Order. The question is that this House do now adjourn. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order. Order.